A peaceful black family sits down for lunch, and suddenly a police officer orders them to leave, not because they did anything wrong, but because someone simply didn't like seeing them there. But what the officer forgot was that his own body camera was recording everything, and it would destroy his career forever. It was supposed to be the kind of Sunday every family dreams of. The Hendersons, Marcus, a hard-working architect with the kindest smile, and Alina, a nurse known for comforting strangers like family, had promised their kids a no-stress day. Just laughter, pancakes, and time together. Their little daughter, Maya, sat with her crayons, humming softly as she colored butterflies on a napkin. Her older brother, Jaden, kept teasing her, making everyone laugh. The diner felt warm, filled with the sound of plates, quiet music, and life simply being normal. For a moment, it felt like the world was peaceful. They were just a loving black family enjoying breakfast, sharing stories, and soaking in simple happiness. The staff smiled at them. The owner waved from the counter. Everything felt safe. Then the bell over the door rang. A police officer walked in. His boots were the kind that announce power before words ever do. He scanned the room, yet somehow his gaze didn't explore. It locked on one table. Their table. He walked straight toward them, ignoring every other customer like they didn't exist. The air shifted. The music suddenly felt quieter. Conversations faded. Maya stopped coloring. Jaden's smile disappeared. Marcus gently placed his hand on his wife's, as if silently saying, "Stay calm." The kids. The officer didn't greet them, didn't ask anything kindly. His tone carried something sharp, something cold. The kind of tone that makes your chest tighten even when you've done nothing wrong. The happy Sunday morning cracked. Warmth turned into unease. Laughter turned into fear. And inside that diner, surrounded by witnesses, injustice quietly pulled up a chair. The officer didn't even bother lowering his voice. Didn't bother explaining. Didn't bother respecting the fact that two little children sat right there watching. He folded his arms, eyes cold, authority dripping not with duty, but with something uglier. "I've had reports of a disturbance," he said flatly. "You people need to leave." The words stung. You people. That wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a line drawn. Marcus blinked, stunned. "Sir, there must be a mistake," he said softly, carefully choosing every word. "We've been sitting here, quietly having breakfast with our kids. We haven't bothered anyone." But the officer wasn't listening. He wasn't here to listen. "I'm not going to repeat myself," he snapped louder this time, making heads turn around the diner. "Either you get up and leave now, or I'll remove you myself." Alina's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel Maya pressing closer to her side, tiny fingers clutching her arm with silent fear. Jaden stared wide-eyed, trying to be brave while his world suddenly stopped making sense. Weren't police officers supposed to protect good people? Why was this happening to them? "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" Maya whispered, her voice trembling. That question shattered something inside Alina. She swallowed hard, forcing a shaky smile for her daughter. "No, baby, you didn't. You didn't do anything wrong." But she couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. The officer leaned closer to Marcus, towering over him as if trying to crush the dignity out of him. "You're causing discomfort to other customers," he said, fabricating confidence into a lie. "This is your last warning." Silence filled the diner. No one had complained. No one had said a word. But nobody spoke up either. Marcus felt his chest tightening. His hands shook beneath the table, not from guilt, but from helpless fury. Still, he stayed calm. He had to. His children were watching. His wife needed him to be steady. He couldn't let fear take over, no matter how deeply it burned. "Officer, please," he said gently, voice barely steady. "My children are here. We haven't done anything wrong. If someone misunderstood something, we can clear it up. Just talk to us with respect." Respect. The officer's jaw tightened, as if that single word offended him. "You don't tell me how to do my job," he snapped. Then his hand dropped to his belt, not drawing a weapon, but letting it sit there as a threat. The message was loud without needing to be spoken. "I have power. Remember that." Maya buried her face in her mother's chest, crying quietly now. Jaden clenched his small fists, jaw shaking as he fought tears. Dad, it's okay, he whispered, trying to be strong though his voice broke. Let's just do what he wants. Marcus's heart shattered. No father ever wants his child to witness fear like this. No parent ever wants their child to think being quiet is survival. The officer's voice grew harsher. Stand up, he ordered. All of you. Right now. Alina exhaled shakily, forcing herself to speak though every nerve inside her screamed. Officer, we are human beings. Please don't scare our children like this. He scoffed. Then teach them to behave. Those words burned. Not just comments. Accusation. Disrespect. Dehumanization wrapped in authority. The diner, once warm and welcoming, now felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Eyes watched, some filled with discomfort, others with shame, and a few with silent agreement. Yet nobody intervened. Nobody said they didn't do anything. Nobody challenged the lie. Because silence is easier. Silence is safer. Silence, too often, becomes complicity. Marcus slowly stood, careful, controlled, fighting the storm inside his chest. He reached for Jaden's shoulder, steadying him. It's okay, son, he whispered, though it wasn't. We're going to be okay. But as he stood, his dignity trembled. He had worked all his life to be honorable, to be good, to build his family a life filled with respect and safety. Yet right now, none of it mattered. Not his job, not his kindness, not his clean record, not his humanity. All the officer saw was the color of his skin. Alina guided Maya gently out of the booth, her own legs weak. She kept whispering, "It's okay. Mommy's here. I promise you're safe." But even she didn't fully believe it anymore. Pain flooded the diner, but this time everyone could feel it. The injustice wasn't subtle anymore. It was loud, blatant, cruel. And worst of all, it was happening right in front of two innocent children whose only mistake was wanting pancakes with their parents. The humiliation wasn't just about being told to leave. It was about being treated like they didn't belong, like their existence was a disruption, like they were less. Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke one more time, not pleading, just broken. Please don't do this in front of my kids. But the officer didn't care. He never did. And in that moment, every viewer would feel it too. The anger rising, the sadness tightening their chest, the helpless ache of watching injustice unfold while a loving family tried desperately to hold themselves together. What began as a peaceful Sunday had now become a nightmare. Not because of danger, not because of wrongdoing, but because someone with power chose cruelty and aimed it right at a family who deserved none of it. Just when it felt like the world had shrunk around the Henderson family, when hope seemed to be slipping through trembling fingers, someone finally moved. Not with panic, not with fear, but with purpose. From behind the counter, a voice called out, steady yet firm. That's enough. Every head turned. The diner owner, Daniel Carter, emerged from the kitchen doorway. He wasn't tall like the officer. He didn't wear a badge or carry a weapon. But he carried something stronger, human decency. His apron was still dusted with flour. His hands smelled of coffee beans and cinnamon. He had been in the back restocking supplies, smiling to himself earlier about how peaceful the morning had seemed. But as soon as he heard raised voices, as soon as he heard words drenched in arrogance and prejudice, his heart tightened. And he knew silence wasn't an option. Daniel walked straight toward the table, his steps unwavering. "Officer," he said calmly, "what seems to be the problem here?" The officer shot him an impatient glance, annoyed someone dared interrupt his performance of power. "This doesn't concern you. Stay out of it." But Daniel shook his head. "It concerns me the moment injustice walks into my diner." The room went completely silent. Forks hovered midair. Coffee cups stopped midway to lips. Even the ceiling fans seemed to slow. No one was breathing normally anymore. Daniel turned to the Hendersons first, because respect begins with acknowledgement. His voice softened instantly. "Are you all okay?" Marcus tried to answer, but his voice broke. He nodded instead. Alina's eyes glistened, tears hanging like fragile glass. Maya clung harder to her mother's waist, while Jaden stared at the ground, cheeks flushed with humiliation. Daniel faced the officer again, But this time his expression hardened. There was no uncertainty in his voice. These people have done absolutely nothing wrong. They were sitting here quietly, enjoying breakfast, same as everyone else. No one filed a complaint. No one asked for them to leave. So unless you have real cause, this ends right now. The officer scoffed. I received a disturbance call. Daniel didn't blink. From who? Silence. No answer. Because there was no call. Look, the officer muttered, frustration creeping into his tone. I'm doing my job. No, Daniel replied firmly, stepping just a little closer, placing himself physically between the officer and the Henderson family like a living shield. Doing your job means protecting and serving, treating people fairly, upholding dignity. What you're doing is harassment. The words echoed. Harassment. Someone finally said it out loud. A few customers lowered their heads in shame for having stayed quiet. Others straightened in their seats, guilt mixing with relief, because at last someone was standing up. Someone brave enough to hold injustice accountable. The officer's jaw tightened. You're interfering with law enforcement. Daniel then backed down. And you're interfering with basic humanity. Alina's trembling eased just a little. For the first time since the ordeal began, she breathed. Marcus's shoulders slowly lifted, dignity finding its way back into his spine. Someone believed them. Someone valued them. Someone was willing to stand in front of them and say they matter. Daniel continued, voice unwavering but respectful. If you're here to check something legitimate, I'll cooperate fully. But if you're here to intimidate a family because of how they look, you're in the wrong place. Not in my diner. Not in my town. The officer stared at him, stunned by resistance. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a civilian in an apron. Power rarely expects courage to push back. Then Daniel did something no one expected. He addressed the entire diner. Did anyone here call in a complaint? He asked loudly. Did anyone here feel disturbed by this family? Silence, then movement. A man near the window shook his head. No, they were just eating breakfast. A woman nodded firmly. They were kinder and quieter than most people I've seen here. Another voice spoke up. This isn't right. Slowly, voices rose like a gentle wave of truth washing across the room. Witnesses, humans, consciences waking up. The officer's confidence flickered. His lie had nowhere left to stand. Daniel turned back to him. You see? No disturbance. No problem. Just a family who deserves respect. So unless you plan on apologizing, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Those were bold words. Dangerous words, maybe, but Daniel wasn't reckless. He was simply done letting fear rule decency. The officer's voice dropped colder. You're making a mistake. Daniel met his stare without blinking. The only mistake will be staying silent. For a long, breath-holding moment, the entire diner balanced on the edge of tension. The officer's hand hovered once more near his belt. Habit, intimidation, ego, all tangled together. But he could feel something shift in the room. He wasn't facing one family anymore. He was facing truth, witnesses, accountability. Most of all, he was facing a man with nothing but courage and conviction standing between him and cruelty. Maya peeked out from behind her mother, watching Daniel like a child watches a superhero come to life. Jaden's chin slowly lifted, eyes filling not with tears, but with awe. For the first time, they saw someone fighting for them, for their right to just exist with peace. Finally, the officer exhaled sharply, annoyance etched deep in his face. He muttered something under his breath, glanced at the silent, united diner, and turned toward the door. Without apology, without acknowledgement, just the bitter retreat of someone who lost the right to bully. The bell above the door jingled again as he stormed out. This time, instead of dread, it carried relief. Silence lingered for a heartbeat. Then Marcus exhaled, deep, shaking, like he had been holding his breath for a lifetime. Alina closed her eyes, tears finally falling, but this time they were tears of release. Daniel turned around, expression soft again. You're safe here, he said gently, and you always will be. Marcus's voice cracked as he whispered, Thank you for standing up for us. Daniel shook his head. You shouldn't have needed anyone to stand up. You never should have been treated that way to begin with. The tension slowly melted into something warm. Hope. Strength. Humanity waking up. In that diner, something powerful happened. A man without a badge proved what true courage looks like. He didn't just protect a family. He reminded everyone watching that kindness isn't weakness, and silence is never neutral. Fear had walked in with heavy boots. But courage chose to stand. The officer stormed out of the diner with heavy, angry steps, the door slamming behind him as if rage itself refused to leave quietly. To him, the scene was over. He believed he had simply been challenged, embarrassed perhaps, but still untouchable. Men like him walked away often, leaving fear behind like shattered glass, and continuing on with their day, certain that power would always protect them. What he didn't realize was that truth had quietly followed him out the door, worn on his chest, blinking, recording, his body cam still active, still capturing, still listening, still bearing witness. And unlike fear, the truth doesn't forget. That same afternoon, Daniel insisted the Henderson family sit back down, not as victims, but as honored guests. On the house. Eat, he said softly, not because of pity, but because no moment of joy should be stolen from you. Though their hands still trembled, they stayed, not to reclaim breakfast, but to reclaim something bigger, dignity. But Daniel didn't stop there. With quiet determination, he picked up the phone. Marcus and Alina hesitated. Like most people who've seen injustice too many times and justice too few. Complaints, investigations, cases, they rarely ended well for families like theirs. It was easier to move on, to survive in silence. But Daniel's voice held steel. If we don't speak, it keeps happening. So they filed a complaint. Not with outrage, not with vengeance, just truth. Soon, the city's Internal Affairs Division received the report. And with it, they received access to something the officer never thought twice about, his body cam footage. Investigators pressed play. What unfolded on that screen was undeniable. The footage didn't just show the confrontation. It caught everything. His tone dripping with contempt. His threats. His deliberate lie about a non-existent disturbance call. His mocking comments once he stepped outside, muttering slurs under his breath, thinking no one listened anymore. But the body cam did. And as the minutes rolled by, truth became impossible to ignore. The officers reviewing the footage sat in stunned silence. This wasn't misunderstanding. This wasn't a bad day. This wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern in motion. His voice carried familiarity and cruelty, too casual, too practiced, like someone who'd done this before and expected to get away with it again. So investigators dug deeper. Old complaints resurfaced, cases that once disappeared into drawers and filing cabinets. Restaurant staff from past incidents spoke up. Citizens came forward. People who had once been too afraid now found courage because someone finally stood up first. Stories began connecting. Patterns emerged. A history of discriminatory stops. A trail of humiliation and intimidation. Years of silence cracking open like old stone under pressure. The department could no longer pretend it didn't see. The city could no longer look away. The truth had become louder than excuses. Then came the moment the public learned. The footage was released. Not leaked by rumor. Not twisted by half-truths. But officially acknowledged by authorities who, for once, chose integrity. News stations replayed the video. The officers' hostility, the trembling voices of children, the calm bravery of Daniel stepping forward like a guardian of decency. Social media carried it like wildfire, but this time it wasn't built on outrage alone. It was built on evidence. The world watched. People didn't just see racism discussed in headlines. They saw it happen. They saw innocence humiliated. They saw silence broken. And they saw a hero stand. The city changed. The diner, once just a cozy breakfast spot, became a gathering place for something bigger. People came not just to eat, but to say we stand with them. Flowers showed up for the Henderson family. Letters filled Daniel's mailbox. Some from local neighbors, some from strangers across states and oceans. Parents wrote saying, "Thank you for protecting children who were scared." Former victims wrote, "Because of this, maybe someone will finally believe us. Marcus and Alina didn't feel invisible anymore. Their children didn't feel alone anymore. Soon the legal system stepped forward. Hearings began. Lawyers spoke. Evidence piled up. In court, the footage played again, this time in the solemn silence of justice. Judges watched. Juries listened. Words like ethics violation, misconduct, racial bias, and abuse of authority filled the courtroom with sharp clarity. No one could twist what the camera showed. No one could bury what the lens had captured. The officer, once arrogant, once untouchable, now sat under the weight of accountability. He wasn't a towering figure barking orders anymore. He was a man forced to face what he had done, what he had been doing for years. And justice finally awakened. He was removed from duty. His record no longer hidden behind bureaucracy. His authority revoked. His shield, once used to intimidate, taken away because a badge belongs to protectors, not oppressors. But accountability didn't end with him. The city faced responsibility too, because injustice isn't just the fault of the one who commits it. It's the fault of every system that allows it to breathe. So the case expanded. The Henderson family didn't ask for revenge. They simply asked for acknowledgement, proof that their pain mattered, that their humiliation had been wrong, that no child should ever tremble in a diner because of someone sworn to protect. When the settlement came, $1.8 million, it wasn't money that mattered most. It was validation. It was the city saying, "We failed you, and we will not pretend it didn't happen." That settlement became more than compensation. It became a statement etched into policy, into history, into every officer briefing room thereafter. Training programs changed. Bias testing implemented. Community oversight tightened. People often say justice sleeps. Maybe it does. But when it finally wakes, it remembers every whisper it ignored. And throughout it all, one truth echoed louder than anything else. Truth cannot be bullied. It cannot be pushed aside. It cannot be erased because someone powerful tried to silence it. The officer left that diner thinking he had won. But in reality, that was the day he lost his shield of impunity. Because courage stood up. Because a community refused to look away. Because the world watched and chose to care. Fear had walked in, but justice walked out, stronger, clearer, undeniable. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom didn't erupt in cheers. There was no triumphant applause, no dramatic celebration. Instead, there was something quieter, something deeper, a collective exhale, relief, healing, dignity slowly being stitched back into a wound that had been torn open in front of the world. The officer didn't walk out wearing confidence anymore. He walked out stripped of the authority he had abused for years. His career ended permanently, not because of hatred, not because of vengeance, but because accountability matters, because a badge belongs only to those who remember the humanity of every person they face. And when the law spoke, it spoke clearly. Power without conscience has no place in protection. For the Henderson family, justice wasn't just a headline. It was a weight finally lifted. Marcus stood taller again, not because $1.8 million was awarded, but because truth had stood beside him. Alina cried, not from fear this time, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, heard, and respected. Little Maya laughed again freely. Jaden, once silent and shaking, now believed something powerful. The world could still be fair. Their dignity wasn't just restored. It was honored. But something extraordinary happened next. The city didn't just issue apologies and close the file. It changed. Policies were rewritten. Training transformed from a formality into a responsibility. Racial bias wasn't brushed aside. It was addressed head-on. Officers began learning not only the law, but empathy, restraint, accountability. Community voices were invited into decision-making. What began as one family's pain turned into a blueprint for protecting countless others. And that little diner? It became more than a place for pancakes and coffee. It became a landmark of conscience. People visited not just to eat, but to remember, to talk, to promise silently that they would never stay quiet when injustice tried to sit down at their table again. Daniel, still wearing his flour-dusted apron, never called himself a hero. But the community did. He wasn't celebrated for being extraordinary. He was celebrated for being human when it mattered most. The Henderson settlement wasn't spent on luxury or revenge. Instead, they turned their pain into purpose. A portion funded scholarships for minority youth dreaming of law, medicine, engineering, arts, the futures that discrimination tries to dim. Another portion supported legal aid organizations, fighting for families who didn't always have cameras, diners full of witnesses, or a brave owner to stand between them and cruelty. Marcus often said, "We didn't win money. We won a voice." And Alina added softly, "We didn't fight to punish someone. We fought so nobody's child has to tremble the way ours did." Life didn't magically become perfect. Racism didn't vanish overnight. But the city learned. The country watched. A conversation grew louder. A promise formed. Asterisk, this is not just their fight. This is everyone's responsibility. Asterisk. Maya still keeps that napkin she once colored butterflies on, now framed in their living room. Not because it marks a nightmare, but because it reminds them of what survived it. Family, love, courage, humanity. Jaden, years later, would tell people proudly, "I saw what happens when people stand up." And that memory didn't make him bitter. It made him brave. The story didn't end in bitterness. It didn't close with revenge. It ended with something far more powerful: empowerment, compassion, change. A cruel moment could have broken them. Instead, it lit a light bright enough to guide others. And in the end, that's what truly won. Not anger, not power, but humanity. Sometimes the bravest battles are fought quietly, at a family table, in front of frightened children, by people who refuse to back down. This family didn't just win justice. They helped change a system. Their courage, the diner owner's humanity, and the truth recorded on one camera proved something powerful. Kindness, dignity, and truth will always be stronger than hate.